Is this... I can't not sprawl. I don't know how to, like... Ooh. This is natural. This is a lot of crotch. This is good. This is the winner. A quick disclaimer. The following content is provided solely as personal opinion and should not be interpreted as legal advice. While copyright law may be discussed within the video, this is not intended to provide authoritative or professional guidance on any legal matters. This is my personal opinion, and if you need legal advice, go find an attorney, not a rando on YouTube. Now that that's out of the way, on with the video. Today, we're making books and talking about nerd stuff. Fandom is a beautiful, wonderful, weird, complicated, joyful, intimidating, crazy thing. And it is the source of many great artistic works, as well as all the slapdash content that we were chucking into the depths of Tumblr in middle school. Today, I'm going to show you how I bound copies of one of my favorite fan works, Crimson Rivers, by Bizarre Stars, formerly Zepazariel, off of AO3. And I'm also going to talk about how fan binding can be a very good thing, and how I think we can avoid it becoming a bad one. Fan binding is a direct result of fandom, and it originated around the 1960s with Trekkie fanzines being shared amongst the fandom. And fandom is a subculture. So, since it's a subculture, before we can talk about binding specifically, we need to talk about the people doing it, the fandom. Campbell Johns writes for Michigan Daily. If you're like me, you discovered fanfiction by frantically scrolling through blurry screenshots of reposted Tumblr Harry Potter headcanons at age 12 until your eyes burn. And, if you're like me, it changed your life. I entered a community of people writing purely for the love of their fandoms, and with absolutely no promise of monetary gain. I started to pick up the customs of fanfiction readers, slowly crawling my way from hashtagged screenshots, from Tumblr to Wattpad, to my final resting place, Archive of Our Own. This is a version of the popular process through which many discover the wonders of fanfiction, developing an appreciation for its writers and community customs as they go. Why, yes, I absolutely am like you, Mr. Johns, because I graduated from Pinterest screenshot headcanons to a secret Tumblr account to fanfiction.net and eventually AO3. And I emerged on the other side with a great love for our community. However, this community is always growing, and it has done so drastically in recent years. Johns goes on to say, when quarantine hit, this cycle of fanfiction discovery was shaken. Fanfiction gained immense numbers of readers over quarantine, with AO3, the most popular fanfiction website, increasing its readership by 20% each month around this year. The stark loneliness of the pandemic, along with the excess time on people's hands, created a perfect environment for new fanfiction users to flock to these sites, finding comfort in fictional worlds that felt so much safer and familiar than our own. This necessity for comfort, along with the steadily increasing credibility of fanfiction due to the popularity of After, All the Young Dudes, and hashtag Draco Talk, just to name a few, all drew new readers in at this staggering rate. As is the case when a community experiences the arrival of a swarm of new people, the fanbase began to change. It is important to note that on the whole, more people reading fanfiction should be considered a beautiful thing. Fanfiction and online communities bring much comfort to those who need it, and I love that more people are defeating its cringy connotation and appreciating it for the fascinating art form that it is. However, problems arise when new readers do not take the time to learn the culture of fanfiction, and therefore do not approach these communities with proper etiquette. Etiquette may seem like a weird word to use in reference to fandom, but it is the correct word. Through the years, we have developed a culture and within it an expectation for appropriate behavior, namely the respect for each other as consumers and creators. Campbell Johns writes, there are a few rules of thumb to understand when consuming fanfiction. Due to the accessibility of writing them, authors come from all sorts of backgrounds, varying in age and writing experience. Not every work is a masterpiece, which readers need to respect before they start reading. Some authors may use betas, someone who reads over a work before posting, but it is rarer. Both of these factors cause the sometimes dodgy grammar or plot holes common in fanfiction, something that has to be accepted as a possibility before reading a work. Many authors have historically used don't like, don't read, a disclaimer phrase tagged on a post to try to shield their work from the sort of criticism that these factors may cause, though its usage has waned through the years. Fanfiction etiquette always errs on the side of respecting the author, something new readers seem to be disregarding. Both the binding of fanfiction and these new waves of harsh, unwanted criticism go against what most older readers understand to be proper etiquette. But in a community overwhelmed with new, uninitiated members, this behavior makes perfect sense. With so many people flocking from Book Talk, where physical books and perfectly commodified 5-star ratings reign supreme, new readers interpret the world of fanfiction through this hyper-commercialized lens, not with the empathy and practices that come from being slowly indoctrinated into fanfiction circles. Understandably, these people want an official version of their reads to put on their shelves and feeds, and they feel inclined to review works in typical Book Talk fashion. Yet doing so is a sign of misunderstanding of how to properly engage with these works and the fanfiction community. Fanfiction is not a business or a trend, though these new participants seem to be leaning that way. We are fans seeking connection, to share and enjoy each other's efforts without putting our community behind a paywall. Not only is this a threat to our pre-established culture, but it poses problems ethically and legally in regards to the binding and distributing of fanfiction.
The real question is this: was all this legal? Absolutely not.
Rebecca Tushnet writes in her article on copyright law and subcultural creativity, hybrid creative practices that mix originality with copying and profit-seeking with volunteerism are likely to pose continuing legal puzzles even as they persist, and perhaps grow, in practical importance. Fanfiction is not small scale. Hundreds of thousands of stories, read millions of times, make fan creators as popular as some commercial genres. That they are non-commercial makes it easy to think of them as less significant than their commercial counterparts, but this is no more true than thinking of childcare performed by parents as culturally and economically less significant than childcare performed by others for pay. And as with multiple sources of childcare, each source of creative effort affects the meaning and shape of others. So, fanfiction has both value and meaning, but due to copyright laws, should remain non-commercial and voluntary. Tushnet goes on to say, when we evaluate copyright as a system, we need to look at its effects on both highly rewarded creators and devalued, ignored, or blocked creators, both publisher intermediaries who invest in content and hosts of self-selected amateur content. Fair use's distinctions between commercial and non-commercial motives, transformative and non-transformative uses, valid and invalid licensing markets exist in constant tension, and a robust creative system would support them all rather than value one above the other, just as it would recognize multiple ways to respect authors. It all comes back to our respect for creators and our efforts to protect their works. I believe the best way to do this is to understand where the line lies in regards to both etiquette and copyright so we do not cross it. I have read over fair use and copyright law myself several times throughout the course of researching through this video, but I found Jennifer Kopp's explanation of fair use to be helpful. Despite the barriers to fanfiction that the derivative work doctrine raises, fanfiction writers may find relief from liability through the fair use doctrine. Some advocates of fanfiction, like the Organization for Transformative Works, argue that fanfiction falls under fair use, which would ultimately eliminate potential legal trouble for such authors. Fair use is an area of copyright law that allows for freedom of expression when using unlicensed copyrighted works in very limited and specific incidences, as established in 17 U.S.C. 107. Though fair use determinations involve 4 distinct factors, the 2 arguably most relevant factors when evaluating the legality of fanfiction work would be, number 1, the purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature, and number 4, the effect of the use upon the potential market or the value of the copyrighted work. So, don't monetize or commercialize, and definitely don't do it to the point of affecting the market value of the source material. But wait! Surely my Etsy side hustle, binding and selling fanfiction, doesn't count? I mean, it's barely profitable, and it's a small business. I'd go so far as to call it like a teensy-weensy business. I can see how you'd think you're in the clear, because you've managed to fly under the radar, even though fair use can be flexible on a case-to-case basis from what I've read. We shouldn't be outright violating it. But we've been discussing rights and laws regarding the source material and its author. What about the fan creators, their rights, and how they're protected? Brittany Luckham sums it up nicely. Now there is an additional aspect to consider. Dr. Betsy Rosenblatt, a law professor teaching intellectual property law at UC Davis School of Law, says, fans own copyright in their own original contributions to a fan work. They don't own anything about the underlying work it's based on, but they do own what they have made. Heidi Tandy, an intellectual property attorney, also states, if you wrote a story and someone uploaded it to Amazon without your permission, even if they changed the names, they are infringing on your copyright. She goes on to add that fanfic writers and fan artists can register their works with the US Copyright Office, or their nation's Copyright Office. Lastly, there are ethical concerns here. If you're binding fanfiction, especially fanfiction which you are not the author of, and then profiting from it, you're discrediting not only the original author, but the fanfic author as well. Fanfic authors write in their spare time. They are doing it because they have a passion and a love for it, not because they can make money from it. They do not own the copyright of the original work, but they have still put time and effort into writing these stories for the public to enjoy, and expect absolutely nothing in return. Fanfiction is free, and it must remain free. Alright, I know that was a lot, and I've been sitting here telling you how not to go about binding fanfiction, so let's talk about how you should go about it. Okay, well, if I can't make money doing this, why would I go to all the trouble? I'm so glad you asked. I have 3 reasons ready to go for you. Number 1, preservation and archiving. Number 2, community and gift economy. And number 3, simply for the love of art. In regards to preservation, Kimberly Kennedy writes, "The practice of preserving physical copies of contemporary fanfiction existed in the years between fandom's migration online in the early 1990s and the creation of Renegade Bindery in 2020. But documentation of such projects remains infrequent and scattered. Fans tend to focus primarily on digital preservation, which takes priority because most fanfiction is posted digitally. Digital archives can comprehensively preserve fan content, while physical archives must curate collections. As with any preservation effort, redundancy in fan work preservation can only benefit attempts to preserve fandom content. Fan binding provides a method of creating and preserving digitally created fanfictions as physical objects. More broadly, fan binding as a practice parallels other kinds of personal preservation efforts that exist outside of fandom and that push back against solely digital methods of content access and ownership as a way of regaining control of personal collections. Within fandom, fan binding harkens back to the fanzine-based circulations of text that characterize certain pre-internet fandoms. Indeed, those fanzines appear more frequently in archival collections every year. Fans today create and circulate more content than ever, and to accurately represent modern fan culture, fan work archives must expand their scope to accept works created after fandom's migration online. Although fan binders generally do not create bound fanfiction solely for long-term preservation purposes, they do recognize their books' value as objects of preservation, both for the stories themselves and as a lasting statement about the validity of fanfiction as a genre. The books also exist as physical objects worthy of collection on that basis alone. Isn't it just so cool that fan binding can connect us to previous generations of fandom, and even unintentionally, we create personal archives and we become archivists and we become guardians of these works. Kennedy goes on to say, "We live in a time where digital storage is practically limitless, allowing us to access, stream, and preserve vast quantities of data. Yet, the things that we choose to preserve in a physical format gain new meanings that express their inherent value while acting as a statement of identity. Instead of choosing more cheaply and efficiently accessed digital content, these creators and collectors put in the effort to own a physical copy. Fan binding, along with other forms of physical collection, place value in items by virtue of someone's choosing to own someone that takes up space in a personal collection. The existence of these fan-bound collections provide long-term access to fan content and acknowledge the importance of fan works and fan culture, establishing fan binding's important role within existing fan work preservation efforts." I adore the sentiment of fan binding being an expression of the value that we place on online works, but it is also a safeguard against losing these works. There is this idea that the internet is forever, but fanfiction can and has been lost, whether it be the author's choice to remove the fic. And yes, I am fully aware that I am binding a Bizarre Stars fic. And I was online and in the middle of reading one of those fics when they removed all of their work, and I supported that decision wholeheartedly, as it was a result of disregard for fandom etiquette. I think that people disregarding the author's wishes and distributing the works en masse via shared PDFs online sucked. And since we just finished discussing intellectual property and disrespect for authors, I hope you can understand why it sucked. However, I went looking to see if there was anything that the author had stated that they were against fan binding, and at the end of this specific work, Crimson Rivers, they did discuss what they do not wish to be done with their work, and amongst it, personal archive was not mentioned. They specifically wanted nothing that could warrant a profit to be done with their work, and they did not want further works reposted online. Personal archiving was not mentioned, and until it is mentioned, I'm going to say that it is okay. I am all for personal archiving, and I have so far gone against none of the author's wishes. So, whether it be the author's choice or if external circumstances are the cause, works can be lost. There's a Tumblr thread that expresses dealing with the latter issue, and it fills me with joy to see fans take such pride in their archives. I highly recommend that you pause and read through the entire thing, but it discusses a lost work that was preserved through someone who would go to the library on the weekends and pay to get chapters of this fic printed little by little, and it's now kept in a binder. It's also a great example of how preserving fan work can be as simple or as complex as you want to make it. If you don't feel like putting in all the immense effort for a fully bound copy of a fanfic, simply get a 3-hole punch and a binder. Another reason besides archiving and presentation to bind fanfiction is to engage with a community and possibly engage in a gift economy. I actually found a friend during this project who is binding her first fanfic, and being able to share our projects and our processes with each other was very rewarding and so much fun. You can also find a large fan binding community online. Lots of blogs, accounts, and channels specifically focus on bookbinding, and some on fan binding specifically. One of the best examples is the Renegade Bookbinding Guild. They are a non-profit guild engaged in fan binding under the idea of a gift economy. A gift economy is a system of exchange where elements are not sold, but rather given without an explicit expectation of reward. If you'd like to learn more about it, I definitely encourage you to visit the Renegade Bookbinding website, because it's not only a helpful source for the physical act of bookbinding, but it is also really great to interact with like-minded people who are binding their own works. And last but certainly not least, you can bind fanfiction simply because you want to. Because we've given these works value and meaning, and we want to give physical form to the stories we love. Sometimes the answer to why do we do this simply is for the love of the art. Hello there. I'm so unbelievably happy with how this project came out, and I hope that you found this video educational, if not even just entertaining to watch. I hope that you will consider these points going forward with your own bookbinding projects in the future, if you have any. I will also have a video out of the process for this book, going into a little more detail about exactly how I bound it, since this video ended up being a lot more just me talking at you, which wasn't the original plan, but I'm pleased with how it came out, so, can't complain. I normally stick to sewing a lot with my projects, and so doing something a little craftier on camera was definitely a change. If you would like to see more of the work I do, be sure to visit my channel. I have a ton of content on there, and even more over on Instagram and TikTok. I'm also on Patreon, and if you're one of my patrons, then you will get regular photo updates of the project throughout the month instead of having to wait until the end for the final video. There's not much else to say than thank you so much for stopping by to spend a little time in my corner of the internet. I hope you have a great rest of whatever it is you're having, a day, a night, who knows. And bye! Fellas, let's make a quick game. Then I gotta be home for lunch. And it is the sort... Fourth... Wrong! Oh my god, can't you pronounce things? Number 1, presentation.